Let's welcome our special guests, series co-creator, writer, director, producer Mark Frost. Sarah Palmer, Joyce Zabriskie. We've got cinematographer Ron Garcia and director-editor Duwayne Dunham.
Thank you for being patient during the reunion.
Yeah, it's been a while. Okay, so, Mark, I have to ask, why could he wait until morning?
We were at 48 minutes.
So I wanted to just start with a little bit of the way that the pilot came together, and maybe tell us a little bit about how you and David first met and started working together.
David and I met in 1985. We were introduced by a mutual agent of ours. I think it was Tony Krantz. And we had coffee at the Old World restaurant in Westwood. David remembers it as being in another restaurant, but we did have coffee. And we were working on a project that I was going to write that he was going to direct at United Artists, based on a book called Goddess by a man named Anthony Burgess, about Marilyn Monroe. And that was the project that we first met on. We hit it off like Ike and Mike. That project didn't get made, but we enjoyed working so much together. We wrote 2 other things together. One of which became a famous unproduced screenplay called One Saliva Bubble, that was very close to being produced when Dino De Laurentiis' company went toes up. And then Tony called us one day and said, how would you guys like to do a TV show? And we both said, heck no. But he kept hammering on us, and he eventually dragged us into this meeting at ABC with a very nice executive named Chad Hoffman, who was the head of current programming at that time. And we'd spent maybe 20 minutes talking about our idea, but we had this theory that if we went in and acted like we'd thought about it a lot more and didn't say very much, that they might go for it. So we kind of sat down, and I think David said, there's this town, and there's this wind. Anybody who's worked with David, in the trees, and he makes these gestures with his hands.
And this damn fine coffee.
Coffee. And we said, and there's a murder, and there's a girl who's found at the side of this lake, and she's the homecoming queen. And he said, great, it sounds like Peyton Place. We said, that's not exactly what we have in mind. A writer's strike happened about 2 months later, and almost a year went by. It was a long strike, a long bitter strike, 1988. And I think the day after it ended, we got a call from Tony. ABC loved your idea, and they really want to move forward with it. And we said, that's great. And we hung up the phone and said, what was the idea? So we then actually had to sit down and work it out, and it started rolling from there.
So tell us about actually airing the pilot. I know that there were some additional scenes shot, which we didn't watch in its complete version, that was for the international, which Ron also wound up shooting as a lot of the material that was at the very end of the episode we just watched.
Yeah, the Red Room sequence. Well, we had a deal to make it as a 2-hour movie, and in those days they called these things Backdoor Pilots. It was possibly going to be picked up. But we always felt like we were the redheaded stepchild over there, because they just thought, these guys are so weird, and what they're telling us about just seems completely something we're not interested in doing, until they saw it. And then they suddenly couldn't take their eyes off it. They didn't know what it was. But they said, look, to protect us and also our distributor, they said, we need to be able to release this as a feature in Europe should the series not move forward. So can you come up with a closed ending that wraps everything up in about a minute and a half? And we said, no problem. So we shot a scene, there's an additional scene there's a bootleg of the European version out there somewhere, and there's a scene that's really stupid in terms of storytelling, where they catch Bob and they wrap the whole thing up. But we also ended up shooting the wonderful Red Room sequence, which Ron directed. He can talk about, he has a funny story about the shooting of that scene, which we did all in about one 18-hour day. And that satisfied our European distributors. And then, of course, once the series came on, nobody in America ever saw that closed ending, thank God. But we saved the Red Room sequence and obviously made good use of it.
For many years, though, that international version was the only available version of the pilot commercially to purchase. Did that ever air?
No, it never aired here. I don't know that it ever even aired in Europe. I mean, they may have released it commercially there as a feature. I know it's still intact somewhere, but.
It's on the gold set.
Did we put it on the gold set? Okay. So then you can see it if you want to look that up. It's worth seeing if you're into the show. Just how absurd the whole idea of closing this thing off in a minute and a half, when we barely could do it in 33 hours. Don't watch it. You said.
Don't watch it until after you watch the.
Listen to him. But the Red Room did come out of that, and that was a major part, as it turned out, of everything that we were doing.
So I should also point out that we have a lot of new viewers to the show. So we'll try and make sure that the questions don't necessarily reveal too much.
Can I do a little poll?
Yeah.
Who saw the show when it first aired? Who's here? Quite a few people. And who saw it for the first time on DVD? About half and half. And who saw it streaming for the first time? Who just imagined it? That's good. Okay.
And who saw it for the first time tonight?
Tonight, yeah. Oh, good. Wow. Some people raised their hand on every answer.
Grace, what was your impression of this script the first time you read it? How did you get involved?
Funnily enough. Oh yeah, this. What do I do?
I think it should be on.
Is it?
Is this thing on?
Funnily enough, I was first brought in to be seen for the role of Lucy. Can you imagine anyone else doing that role? But of course, David never mentioned it, or Sarah, or anything about anything, really. Basically, I told him stories like, this Cajun play that I had done in New Orleans using a Cajun accent, which is when he figured out that he wanted to write the role in Wild at Heart, I think. So pretty much what I did from...
Oh, sorry, Grace, would you mind holding the mic?
Pretty much what I did when I went in for Twin Peaks was, try and get myself into a movie, Wild at Heart. No, I didn't know what he was doing.
What was the question?
Well, I think you kind of answered it, how you first got involved with
Right.
the show.
Yeah, I was being seen for Lucy.
I'd forgotten that. That's pretty
I almost forgot it.
Yeah.
I was reminded rewatching the show recently the show, it has many different tones to it. And it's very funny, sometimes it's very strange, sometimes it's creepy. But what I found really affecting was how tragic the show can be with your performance. And I'm curious to know how you prepare for a role like that, knowing that you have to go to some very extreme and dark places.
I'm not quite sure. There are certain things about acting that I think I've decided over the years are not really my business. I just have to do them, and I have to, be able to talk about them. But David was pushing me more and more. You know, that scene with the phone, and I finally said, he'd say, "You got another one? You got another one?" You remember how he? And I said, I was over the top 3 takes ago. So it's surely not anymore. And he said, "Come on, you 2 more, 2 more." So I finally got I finally started this. That was the beginning of our long time collaboration, which was always unspoken, and had to do with my finally understanding that if you were miserable and tragic enough, just another beat, and finally it would be funny. And some people would laugh, and other people would look at them really angrily for laughing. And that would be my life for a few years.
I'm curious to know how you guys incorporated other writers and other directors into the show. And Duwayne, the episode that we watched, I think that was your first directing gig, and also following work as an editor with David. First of all, what is it like to have to take over for David? Because you were presenting the first episode, post-pilot. And Mark, what were you guys looking for in other directors?
Well, Duwayne was an easy choice going in because he and David had such a great working relationship, and he knew the pilot so well. And it was really about just sitting down, and it was Duwayne's first directing job on that episode. So we spent a lot of time talking about the tone of the show and what we were looking for, and then it was just kind of like saying, "Go have some fun while you do this."
It was frightening for sure, but following David is not an easy task by any means. But when you work as an editor, there's such a long gap between when the pilot was shot and completed, certainly shot for the actors, and to when the series got picked up, because nobody really thought that series was ever going to get picked up. And it was a big surprise, and then all of a sudden, I think it was a lot of things. David was getting ready to do Wild at Heart, and an editor probably knows the characters, where they are in the arcs, almost better than anybody else other than Mark or David on the show. So it wasn't that big of a stretch, but I will admit, may I just say one thing first? I had the great pleasure of editing a scene that Grace, she mentioned it, so I'm gonna comment on it. There's a scene in a movie called Wild at Heart that to this day is the most moving, best work that I have ever done. Nobody will ever see it because the very first time we screened it with a small audience, David had mixed the music, as you know he would, and he took that over the top. And it was distorted and it was crazy, and the scene was about 12 minutes long, and it literally made your fingernails lift off your hands, and Grace was just fabulous. Well, it was great, but we had to cut it down. And then we cut it down, and it was still great. But the first time we went to a public screening with a audience like you people, at that very moment in the scene, 125 people stood up and left the theater. And we said, well, you need a David Lynch crowd. You got a Disney crowd. Anyway, a couple days later, right back in, and it's exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment. The scene will never be seen by anybody, Grace, but it was absolutely phenomenal.
I wanted to see it so badly. I have some friends who got to see it. It was this 11-minute monologue where I just trudged up and down talking about how I was going to kill Harry Dean. It wasn't violence. It was torture, psychological torture.
So Ron, I'd love to know your relationship working with Patricia Norris and also the location manager for the pilot, because you have